Hi, I'm Carmen.
And I'm Steven, and this is Vienna Past and Present, where we stroll through the gilded and sometimes not so gilded halls of Vienna's history.
Today we're looking at a somewhat forgotten aspect of Viennese history, or maybe it was never that well known to the general public, but for centuries, Vienna was at the forefront of medical research and advancement of medical sciences. The world's first dermatology, eye, and ENT clinics were all founded in Vienna in the late 19th century, and Vienna continued to be at the cutting edge of medicine well into the 20th century. It was a place for new ideas and experimentation, but not everything panned out. Some ideas were innovative, some were groundbreaking, and some were kind of off the wall, and slightly less than scientific. So today we're going to be looking at one such case, namely that of the medical doctor and psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich. And yes, of course, there is a connection to Freud, who had plenty of his own quirks, and definitely will get his own in-depth episode at some point. So, while you've probably never heard of Reich, if the mere mention of Freud is making you think about weird sexual hang-ups, then, spoiler alert, your mind is in the right place.
Yeah, we've talked about architecture and candy from Vienna, but maybe we've been overlooking the city's metaphysical scene. Can cosmic energy cure cancer and give you better orgasms? I guess we like historical healthcare, like we've talked about the city's scales, healthy nudism. Now this episode, which will take us from an interesting late Habsburg childhood to a friendship and then falling out with Freud, to a standoff with the FDA in the US in Maine. Just as a teaser.
Yeah, Maine of all places. We'll get to that. But before we get to all that, I think we need to talk about Reich's childhood.
Okay, but first let's back up even more and give a sense of what Vienna was like at that point. Reich was born at the very end of the Habsburg monarchy, and he would make a lot of his discoveries during the early days of the Austrian Republic. So here's a visual I'm going to try out this time. Let me know how this goes. So picture it. Vienna still had an imperial cityscape and looks. Lots of trams, coffee houses full of politics and art. There were cranes in the skyline, building new housing blocks. And just beneath all of that, the city was wrestling with reduced status, new political experiments, and the very recent memory of a war it had just lost. So how's that for a stage setting? Let me know how it goes.
I think that was pretty evocative.
I kind of liked it. We're getting poetic.
Yeah, I like it. It's good. Right. So into this whole scene of major political change and cutting-edge medical research, Wilhelm Reich was born in 1897 in Galicia, which was a part of Austria-Hungary at the time, and it's a part of Ukraine today. And I would say his child was, to put it mildly, not ideal.
Yeah, around the time he was 12, his mom had an affair with his tutor, which he discovered by spying on them.
Yeah, so he supposedly followed her to the tutor's room at night when she would go to, have relations with him, I guess. And he said that he felt embarrassed and ashamed and scared, and even feared that they might kill him if they found out that he was spying on them, so...
I guess. Maybe that's just like a childhood feeling, like you feel as a kid. I don't know.
Right. But most bizarrely, so, he's 12 at this stage, right? And he apparently also thought about trying to force his mother to have sex with him on the threat of telling his father about the affair. So basically blackmailing his own mother into having sex with him, which already feels like something Freud would have a field day with.
Okay, yeah. He has a lot going on in his childhood.
Yes, at
clearly.
Age 12 to even come up with that idea.
Yikes.
The good news is he ultimately chose against blackmailing his mother with that sort of thing, but he did tell his father about the affair, which led to a period of him getting beaten. It's unclear by who. I couldn't really find much more information on that.
Okay.
I don't know if it was his dad or his mom or the tutor. It's all a kind of hazy story. But ultimately, very tragically, his mother died by suicide in 1910, and Reich blamed himself for that. So on the whole, he had a pretty tragic, traumatic, confusing childhood that probably informed a lot of the ideas that he had later in life.
Wow. We've talked about some weird childhoods on this show, but this might win an award, at least at this point, until we release those Wittgenstein episodes. There's a teaser. We have some we haven't released. Anyway.
Yeah, I think Reich is up there. One of the reasons that we even know these things is that he later wrote about all of this in a paper that was titled, in English, On a Case of Breaking Through the Incest Barrier. And that's kind of where this information is coming from. In particular, the part about blackmailing his mom comes from those writings. And so this seems kind of troubled already at this stage.
Yeah.
To say the least. Yeah. So anyway, so he grows up in Galicia. After high school, he moves to Vienna, and he initially studied law for quite a short period of time, but then he switched to medicine. And I was reading through his Wikipedia page, which includes this amazing little tidbit that I just want to include. I don't know why this is in his Wikipedia page. There's like seemingly no reason for it, but it says that while studying in Vienna, quote, he fell in love with another medical student, Leah Latsky, with whom he was dissecting a corpse, but it was largely unrequited, end quote. Like, what? Where did that detail about the corpse come from? Why do we need to know that? It never gets mentioned again. This woman doesn't get mentioned again. It's just a random little tidbit of information.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, these childhood stories are a lot. Now, formaldehyde, I guess, isn't a turnoff for him. I guess, shocking it didn't work for her.
Right. Dissecting a corpse wasn't really doing it for her, I guess. But anyway, so while he's studying in Vienna, Reich eventually got introduced to Freud himself. So, this was the time when Freud was teaching at the University of Vienna, so he doesn't just get introduced to his ideas, he gets introduced to the man himself. And he was very influenced by Freud's ideas, and he started practicing psychoanalysis at the age of 22. There was no license required. He just jumped right into it.
Sounds ethical so far. Probably unsurprisingly, one of his first patients was a 19-year-old he had an affair with. I guess Freud discouraged this sort of thing, but also accepted that it could happen. So psychology was kind of an anything goes thing at this stage.
Yeah, no kidding. I think it was all a bit buddy-buddy, Wild West at the time. Reich also lived on the same street as Freud in Vienna, so they saw each other a lot. In Berggasse.
Okay.
So Freud lived at number 19, Berggasse, and Reich lived at number 7. And those buildings are still there, so if you happen to be in the area around the University of Vienna, a stroll down Berggasse will put you in the historical footsteps of both Freud and Reich.
Awesome. So you could really get into their heads or something, if you want that, which, so far, I don't know that you would. But walk it and think about malpractice, I guess. This brings us to the next chapter, right? Which I think that does kind of set the stage.
It does set the stage. It is a major chapter of his life, but we're not quite there yet. There's a few things that happened first.
Okay.
So Reich first became a star in Freud's clinic, which was called the Vienna Ambulatorium, and that offered free psychoanalysis. And he was reportedly quite a charismatic lecturer. He hosted very popular seminars and drew quite a crowd. And in 1922, he also got taken up in the International Psychoanalytical Association that Freud had founded, which was like the main psychoanalytical association. I think even to this day, I'm not totally sure, but it was definitely like the main association for psychoanalysts at the time. So things are going well for him at this stage. And then in 1924, he started working on one of his signature theories, which he called orgastic potency.
Okay, that is what it sounds like, right?
Yes. Yes, it is. I guess if it was orgasmic potency, it would be even more on the nose. He called it orgastic potency.
Like, wait, in the German, is there that distinction too? Like, do you know? Or is this like the English rebranding of it?
That's a good question. I don't know that I checked what it was called in German.
Okay, I'm just wondering if they like sort of hid it in the German as well. Okay, maybe that's a challenge question for like the show notes after.
Like it's there, but not fully, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Anyway, he defined orgastic potency as the ability to surrender fully during orgasm and to lose one's ego in the process. And he believed that this was the key to mental health and also to physical health. So you can definitely see the Freudian influence there, but Reich took it even further than Freud did.
Okay, and I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous name, but some of this is sounding kind of modern and kind of plausible to me, right? Like this, it would be good to just kind of like, let yourself feel it. I don't know. Anyway, maybe in the context of this time when everybody is so kind of buttoned up, am I taking a side? I don't know. But anyway, that earned him ridicule, nicknames like Prophet of the Better Orgasm and Founder of a Genital Utopia. And I think it could be a lot worse, actually, but probably not helpful.
They're kind of solid nicknames, honestly. I mean, you could do worse. But the ridicule in those nicknames really didn't stop him, because at this point, he also moved from pure psychoanalyst into something more physical. He developed something called, and I have no idea how to pronounce this, vegetotherapy or vegetotherapy or vegeto. I assume the German is vegetotherapy. It kind of works in German. The English, I guess, is vegetotherapy.
Okay, I would read that like vegetotherapy.
Vegetotherapy, okay. I hadn't even thought of that.
I mean, but okay, it's one of those five.
Which sounds like you're doing therapy on vegetables or something, right? It's like
Yes.
It's a very strange.
Like you're around cucumbers or something.
Well, maybe that is part of the idea. It's a very strange name.
Okay, so what was it?
This kind of took his whole thing a little bit further because it involved asking patients to undress and then manipulating their muscles to release emotional blockages. And I think in like the ideal case to actually evoke an orgasm.
Okay, the license suddenly feels very important. Okay, I'm being pro-license now.
Yeah, could have maybe used more licensing.
Let's regulate some of this.
Yeah, some licensing and regulation probably wouldn't have hurt. One critic already at the time said that it replaced the psychoanalyst's creed of, quote, never touching the patient with, quote, a physical attack by the therapist. So things kind of took a turn.
Okay, and this was still about mental health? Like, did he think that, or?
He insisted that it was. And he said that the goal of all of this was for the patient to release tension through full body convulsions that resembled orgasms. And Reich called this the orgasm reflex. And yeah, this was all happening in therapy, but it wasn't without controversy, especially since Reich also worked with minors. So he's doing this therapy not only with adults, but also with people under the age of 18. So that was already controversial back then. Freud, in particular, didn't approve of such methods, and Reich ultimately had a falling out with Freud and the Psychoanalytical Association over these practices, and then he was expelled from the association in 1934. And I think his increasingly political ideas didn't really help either, because at the time he was aligning with Marxism and advocating for sexual reform and education, and so he was really stepping out of the mainstream, and that, I think, contributed to the falling out.
Okay, so far, radical leftist sex therapy with cosmic energy, kind of?
We're getting to the cosmic part, yeah.
I mean, maybe maybe that comes later, I guess, spoiler. He was definitely a trailblazer. It's interesting, too, to kind of think about this time where psychology and very alternative medicine practices were in a single bucket like this. And I know they are for some people still, but this is like at Freud's like headquarters. So, yeah, and I feel like I should have a Freud joke, but I don't know much about him, so we need that episode for my sake.
All right, we'll get on it. And there is a lot to be said about Freud, for sure. But anyway, at this point, Reich had been kicked out of the psychoanalytical world. So what's an expelled radical orgasm therapist to do? Well, flee the country, of course.
Yeah, and to kind of catch us up on the timeline, like, as a Jewish person in 1939, the thing to do was to leave, Austria and Germany, understandably.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, we're in the late 1930s here. And so in 1939, a year after the Anschluss, and just before the start of World War II in Austria, Reich caught the last ship, actually, that was leaving for America before the outbreak of hostilities in September of 1939. So he left in August of 1939, and then war breaks out in September. And then he settled in New York and started developing his most infamous idea, which is what we're going to kind of spend some time on now, which was called Orgone energy.
Okay, yeah, this is me getting ahead of myself earlier. So, according to the notes, the cosmic life force. Invisible, omnipresent, and according to Reich, closely tied to sexual energy. It seems to be kind of a focus for him still.
Yeah, there's a through line here. There's a pattern.
Yeah.
So yes, orgone was a substance that he claimed to have discovered, and it was something like a vital sexual / orgasmic life energy, according to him.
Okay.
And he believed that deficits in orgone caused disease, especially cancer. And so you needed to collect orgone in order to heal certain diseases or to stay healthy. And so in order to harness this energy, he invented something called the Orgone Accumulator, which was basically a wooden box lined with metal.
Okay.
And the idea was that you would...
Excuse my laughing.
Yeah. The idea was that you would sit inside, naked, of course, and absorb concentrated orgone. So according to him, this box somehow accumulated this energy, and sitting inside naked would allow you to absorb this orgone energy.
Okay. In this little paragraph, there were so many leaps, all right? That's what I am struggling to keep up. There's like a DIY sauna without any heat. I'm also getting some crystals vibes from this concept too. So I guess he was kind of ahead of his time. I mean, that crystals are kind of back.
I think in some ways he really actually was ahead of his time. We can maybe put a photo in the show notes, but yeah, this Orgone box really looks like, it does kind of look like a sauna, like a one-person sauna with a chair inside, and you just sit there, and it's a wooden, closet, more or less. And so, yeah, he claimed that sitting in this box boosted health, it cured disease, and yes, he claimed it could even spark spontaneous orgasms. So if you sat in there long enough and collected enough of this energy, you could just like spontaneously have an orgasm by yourself, he claims.
Wow, okay.
And he began testing his Orgone accumulators, so basically these wooden sauna boxes, on patients with cancer and schizophrenia.
Wow, yeah, he is always very cross-disciplinary. And again, I'm kind of like, I want some licenses, but like, how would the licensing even keep up? Okay, he's breaking out into new practices all the time.
I mean, that's true. He's blazing his own path here, yeah.
Yeah.
But he did, I think, fully believe in his ideas, and he really did make great efforts to promote them. And the highlight of that, or maybe at the end of the day, the low light for him, was when he tried to sell Albert Einstein on his Orgone accumulator box idea.
That is confidence.
And he wasn't just, writing some letters or whatever. He actually went to Princeton, where Einstein was teaching, and he met with Einstein, and he gave him a small Orgone accumulator that Einstein then, in fact, experimented with for 10 days. So initially he took it at least semi-seriously.
10 days. That's a lot of Einstein's time. Wow.
And so Reich had claimed that you could measure an increase in temperature in the Orgone accumulator without any source of heat, right? And he claimed that was the Orgone energy that was accumulating and that would create this increase in temperature. So Einstein experimented with it a bit, and apparently he did measure an increase in temperature, and Reich argued, of course, that this was caused by Orgone. However, Einstein pretty quickly determined that the temperature was lower on the floor than in the ceiling, and so, he was really just measuring the temperature gradient in the room, right? i.e. hot air rises, so it was warmer at the top than at the bottom, which I don't think was a groundbreaking idea at this stage. I think that was pretty well established.
It feels a little bit like elementary school science fair a little bit right now. Okay.
Yeah. And so Einstein basically dismissed Reich and, didn't take the Orgone box seriously, but Reich continued writing to him and continued trying to convince him of the potency of Orgone, but Einstein just ignored him after this, and there's no evidence that Einstein ever communicated with him again, although Reich continued to write to him.
Okay, still, Einstein sounds so patient and kind here. Like, I swear all the stories I've heard about him make him sound that way. I don't know if that's, expert management from the Einstein family estate or what, but,
his PR is good.
It's great. Yeah, it's like Mark Twain level. So Reich is rejected by the establishment yet again on a new continent, but he's kept going in the past. So what did he do next?
Yeah, he's not one to give up, that's for sure. So in 1942, Reich bought a farm in Maine and decided to call it Organon. So he's sticking with his theme.
Okay.
Organon actually still exists, and it houses the Wilhelm Reich Museum today. So you can go there and visit it. And so for all you Orgone fanatics out there, you can even stay overnight in the house that Reich used to live in. And it wasn't just his home, though. So Reich also used this property as his lab and for, experimenting with all of his new ideas.
Wow. You could go and see his original, orgasm box.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder. Okay. Okay, and there's a kind of Orgone retreat there, right? Or there was.
Right. So when he was living there, he kind of turned it into this Orgone center and tried to attract people to come there and to do these, I guess what you would today consider a wellness retreat, right? I guess we have what do we have these days? Sweat lodges and stuff. I think this was his version of that.
It is sounding sweat lodgy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come sit in an Orgone box, have an orgasm, cure your cancer. I think that was kind of the concept. And he did attract quite a lot of people. So it did have...
Okay.
He did have a kind of a following, but his growing fame also brought him trouble. And in 1947, there was a journalist whose name was Mildred Brady, and she wrote a takedown piece basically calling him a quack.
Okay.
The article was published in the New Republic. It was called The Strange Case of Wilhelm Reich, with the subheading that read, quote, the man who blames both neuroses and cancer on unsatisfactory sexual activities has been repudiated by only one scientific journal. And so she writes this article actually also really criticizing the medical establishment and the scientific establishment for not repudiating these ideas, although I don't think they really supported them either. It's unclear how much they engaged with any of this, but anyway, this journalist was of the opinion that this should be debunked. So that ultimately caught the FDA's attention. So that's the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. And the FDA started investigating him.
Okay. Yeah, this was going to catch up with him. I feel like once he started trying to address cancer, stuff like that is more measurable. But I don't know, I was kind of rooting for him in a weird way as well. Like maybe there's this something unsinkable about him, right? That I think I'm kind of charmed by. Anyway.
Yeah, I think on some level, the kind of, mental physical connection I think actually is very modern, but trying to claim that it cures cancer is obviously very dangerous and unscientific, and that he was taking it too far there.
Or maybe there's just a little bit of shmee to this.
Maybe. Yes, nice callback.
It's a little through line. Anyway, so what happened to him?
So what happened to him was that the FDA investigated him, and by the early 1950s, they basically determined that he was, according to them, quote, a fraud of the first magnitude, unquote. And so they ended up slapping an injunction on him that banned interstate shipment of orgone devices, and they ordered that all of his orgone accumulators and promotional materials be destroyed.
Okay, and he ignored that. Can't say I'm surprised.
Yes, he was not about to do any of that, but what it did do was that it really triggered a deterioration in Reich's mental state. So the FDA is cracking down on him. They're kind of saying that all of his materials have to be destroyed. He does not do that, but he does become increasingly paranoid at this time and starts to really have more delusions than previously. And then he gets into more serious legal trouble in 1956 because an FDA inspector who posed as a customer requested an orgone accumulator in another state, and Reich, or one of his associates, sent it there. And so that was a violation of the injunction, right? Because he was not allowed to ship these things across state lines. So he was cited with violating the injunction. He skipped court, which of course he was requested to turn up at, and then he got arrested and decided to represent himself at trial, which I do not think was probably a great idea. I mean, I did mention up top that he studied law.
Just never seems to go well.
For a quick second, but in Austria, so I highly doubt that helped him in any way.
Right, when he was 18.
Yeah, it never goes well, right? You really should not be representing yourself. So, surprise, surprise, he lost, and then he was sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Okay, and the FDA burned and banned his books. So, wow.
Yeah, so they did then destroy all of his books, and they destroyed the orgone boxes as well. And that was part of the legal settlement, was that everything, all of his materials, his promotional materials, these orgone accumulators, his written materials, his books, that they would be banned and destroyed.
Wow.
So around this time, his delusions increased and his ideas veered even more into science fiction and sort of unlikely territories. And so at this stage, he started claiming that UFOs were attacking Earth with deadly orgone energy. So previously, we only had orgone as a vital life energy that was somehow achieved through orgasm, or I guess by sitting in an orgone accumulator box. But now we have sort of this negative version of it that was apparently wielded by UFOs/aliens.
Yeah, this is getting hard to follow.
Yeah, so, this is the mental state that we're at this point. And he, to combat these UFO aliens with their deadly orgone energy, he built a device called the Cloudbuster, which you can Google. There is a Wikipedia page about it, and it looks like a large fork, kind of. I mean, it's a strange-looking contraption. And he even claimed that he fought a battle against aliens in the Arizona desert with this Cloudbuster thing to, prevent the deadly orgone energy from attacking Earth, I guess. I don't know. It's all a bit hard to follow at this point.
Right. The last 10 things you said, you kind of ended with question marks. So yeah, I don't know. It's like we were veering into Scientology territory. There were aliens, there were forces, and there were tools to fight them that looked like simple household objects. But I feel like we're kind of past that even. He's losing me now.
Yeah, I think he lost a lot of people at this point, and he spent his final months in prison believing that the president of the United States at the time would pardon him, or that the FBI would somehow rescue him, and he claimed to have personal connections to both of them, which does not seem substantiated in any way.
Yeah.
And of course, neither one happened. He didn't get pardoned, and the FBI did not come and rescue him. And so in 1957, he died in his cell of heart failure at the young age of 60.
Wow, that's a sad end. And I'm really not a misinformation or a fraudster fan, but somehow this makes me think like he believed in this stuff. I don't know. It seems like he meant well on some level, or he did for much of that time.
Yeah, I think so. I would agree with that. And he did a lot in his 60 years of life, that's for sure. And he really didn't give up on his ideas.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, what's the legacy here? And I think there's a few things we can point to. So he was, in fact, considered a brilliant clinician and teacher in his early days. So he had quite a following when he was at the University of Vienna, and he really was charismatic and had like a little following at the time. But he does seem to have slid increasingly into delusions, and he himself was in psychoanalytical therapy, right? As a psychoanalyst, he was also going to other psychoanalysts as a patient, and some of them, even in his early years, suspected schizophrenia or similar already then. So, signs of that were already kind of there. And so, yeah, the question is, was he a genius who slipped into madness, or was he a charlatan? Who knows? But at least one University of Oregon professor, Oregon. Oh, now when I say that, it sounds very much like Oregon. Oregon.
Yeah. Oregon, the state of Oregon in the U.S. Anyway.
Yes, the state of Oregon. Unrelated to Orgone, as far as I'm aware. Although, who knows? Anyway, there was a professor at the University of Oregon who had bought an Orgone Accumulator, and the FDA interviewed him when they were investigating Reich and, all of his activities.
Okay.
And he said that when he bought the device, he knew that it was phony, but he found that it was helpful because his wife sat quietly in it for 4 hours every day, and he found that useful.
Okay.
So, I mean,
okay.
That was the attitude at the time, I guess.
Huh.
And I found quite interesting that quite a few famous people used Orgone accumulators, supposedly, including Sean Connery, Jack Kerouac, and J.D. Salinger. And Norman Mailer also apparently owned several of them, and also wrote an article about Reich in the Village Voice, which I tried to look up, but it's behind a paywall, so I could only really see like the first little paragraph.
Okay. Interesting, because, Sean Connery, he's not that old, so he would have some of them, after they were all ordered destroyed and stuff.
Well, isn't he like he's got to be in his late 80s, if not 90s, or...
I guess, but 50s?
He's pretty old.
Okay, fine, yeah, maybe he could have gotten one. Okay, to play devil's advocate here, maybe sitting in a box, that's just meditation, right? Like, that's known to be beneficial.
True, yeah, maybe he discovered meditation, basically, which,
Or just, that was happening. Also, he did have a theory about the mass psychology of fascism, which won him a lot of followers. Unfortunately, that's probably relevant again today. So in that, the main question he was asking was, why did the masses turn to one form of authoritarianism over another? So like, why fascism over communism in Germany? Yeah, and I could definitely see him having something to say about that. Like, he witnessed that happening while being an amateur psychologist, so that would give him an interesting viewpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, also legacy-wise, like, he interacted with lots of prominent figures in history, Freud, Einstein, like, that's really kind of incredible. It seemed like he was really part of the zeitgeist at that time, but yeah, like, I've never heard of him. Maybe he's been forgotten because, I don't know, his work was... Well, it veered off into sci-fi, like you said. It was literally destroyed by court orders, and it's like, if you're perceived as crazy, these ideas don't really pan out. There's a lot of pseudoscience. Maybe that can kind of discredit some of the other good aspects, right? Like by the end of one's life.
Yeah, true. Although it's kind of interesting, right? Because you mentioned Scientology before, which has a lot of these very bizarre ideas too. And that material did not get destroyed. It got accepted as like a tax-free religion in the US. So, it can go this way or that way, apparently.
Yeah, right. And, the original ideas that orgasms were good for health, those became accepted by the 1960s, right? So I wouldn't imagine Reich was credited with that.
Yeah, so I don't really think he was credited with these ideas, but some of them did become very mainstream, actually.
Right, or there's like kernels of good things here, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
And one thing that he also kind of can be credited with is that he pioneered the psychoanalytical development of intense breathing combined with body work, and that yielded some of the central elements in holotropic breath work, which I don't know very much about, but there is a podcast that I used to listen to quite regularly called Oh No, Ross and Carrie, and they did an episode.
Really good
Yeah,
show.
so we can recommend that. Check it out. There is an episode about holotropic breath work, which is some sort of breathing technique that kind of, I think, you semi-hyperventilate kind of, but it's sort of meditative, and it is used as a therapy tool to this day.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and I mean breath work, that's like in yoga, that's in, anti-anxiety sort of management that people do. So I don't know, like maybe he didn't invent that, right? Maybe he didn't invent any of this, but he called attention to these things that I think we consider important today.
I would say there was something to his ideas, like you said, sort of a kernel, some good kernels in there, and at least some elements have stood the test of time. But at the end of the day, I think his downfall really was that, I mean, first of all, his delusions, and he kind of veered off into this very strange sci-fi world. But he also had a sort of way about him where he was very self-assured, and he really saw himself as like the expert, and it really didn't leave much room for criticism that might have caused him to become a little bit more aware of his slide into paranoia. He doesn't seem to have been very open to
Right.
people pointing that out. And he operated reportedly in a rather authoritarian way, and mostly alone, once he was exiled from the psychoanalytical community. So in his early career, he was much more tied into the general community of psychoanalysts and into this association. But after he was expelled, he seems to have mostly worked alone, and I don't think that probably helped with his delusions. He was very directive in his approach, and the way that he managed his patients really kind of metastasized into authoritarian demands for subservience that created a mini cult around him, and that cult kind of survives to this day. So there are still some people out there who champion orgone theory and who go and visit this Wilhelm Reich museum and, still kind of believe in these ideas. And orgone therapy still exists. You can apparently still get this.
Okay.
But it is generally considered to be junk science and is not taken seriously by the mainstream. But it's still out there, and there are Reich followers who still believe in these kind of things.
Okay. Yeah, I did see some stuff like that actually, and I can touch on that in a bit.
Yeah, so what do you think, Stephen? Charlatan, genius, or a man undone by his own obsessions?
I guess I've sort of answered this in parts. It is great that maybe he influenced later therapies like breath work and Gestalt, which I guess, have we talked about that?
No, we didn't, but he did influence that as well, Gestalt therapy. One of his main students was the founder of Gestalt therapy, so he influenced that as well.
So yeah, but there's pseudoscience, there's like paranoia, fraud convictions, which at first I was kind of on his side. You heard me. Orgasm boxes. I mean, I don't know. Who doesn't like that idea? But yeah, I was Googling. I found an interesting letter to the New York Times after Reich's death. It was this therapist who was trying to correct the record, saying that Reich helped the field of psychology, that his books are considered classics, he said. Here's a quote from it, and this is just after Reich's death, so this would have been like 1950-something. Here's a quote. You make no mention whatsoever of what many qualified persons consider a momentous contribution to psychiatry on Dr. Reich's part, namely his comprehensive and detailed attempt to show how repressed emotions and neurotic character attitudes become anchored in muscle tensions and other chronic rigidities of the body. And I can't judge this as a psychologist myself, but I think it shows that some people considered his work really important. And, in my experience in my own therapy and talking to friends who are therapists, like connecting emotions and the physical body, that sounds really modern to me. So, but also, since we've kind of touched on these culty parts, in my own research as well, like just looking around YouTube, there are some videos about him that are odd. Like the tone is very kind of drony in that pseudo-religious kind of voice right? Talking about his past. I saw one talking about his childhood that mentions nothing, okay, about all the strange stuff that I think he kind of instigated himself, right? His childhood was summed up as like, his mom had an affair, and then his mom committed suicide, so he had a hard childhood. Then he invented this thing which has been suppressed. Like, really, the cult thing makes more sense now. We didn't talk about that before this episode, but it was surprising, and there's really something there, maybe. And yeah, that's just not, in like the current climate today, it's just something that freaks me out. There's a lot of people believing strange things, right?
Yeah, like a sort of personality cult, I guess, on some level. Although I think the one thing I can say in his defense is I don't think he was a charlatan. I think he did believe the things that he was promoting.
I think so too.
Highly misguided.
Yeah, which, again, does not make it correct, right? But he was not some calculating, villain necessarily.
Yeah, that's at least my impression. I don't think that he was intentionally trying to mislead people. I think he fully believed it, just he was, had some strange beliefs and, was kind of increasingly mentally ill himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really interesting quote that you read from that New York Times article. And so, at least one person felt it was important enough to write a letter to the New York Times about. So, he had some influence. And so for all of that, plus his connections to some of the biggest scientific names of the 20th century, it is a bit sad, I think, that Reich and his ideas have been mostly forgotten.
There is a movie, though. I'm kind of a movie person. I didn't see it streaming in the US, at least at the time that we're recording this, but it's about 10 years old, so kind of recent, called The Strange Case of Wilhelm Reich.
Yes, I also saw that, and it looks like it's on Apple Plus here in Austria, but I don't have Apple Plus, so I couldn't watch it. I did, though, see that the movie features Birgit Minichmayr, who is a well-known Austrian actress, who I used to regularly see at a dive bar here in Vienna, and I even shared a pizza with her once, so that's my little claim to fame.
Whoa.
And I guess my 2 degrees of separation from Wilhelm Reich, if we're being very generous about it.
Wow, yeah, there's no way we could top that. Okay. So I guess the episode's over.
Yeah, that's all there is to say about that. So that's it for our show. So thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, share with your friends or leave us a 5-star review. And if you didn't like it, then don't worry about that review. You
can find us on social medias, Vienna Past and Prez on Instagram, or send us your episode ideas at viennapastandpresent@gmail.com.
Auf Wiedersehen, Pfiat euch, Baba.
Bye. Ooh, this is switching it up.
What do you mean?
I kind of like it, though. I'm saying the Vienna Past and Present where we stroll through. That's usually you, right?
Oh, yes.
But let's go with it.